John chapter 5. Shall we, brothers and sisters? John chapter 5. It's written as follows. After these events there was a Jewish feast, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Near the sheep gate there was a pool called Bethesda in Hebrew, which had 5 porches. A large crowd of sick, blind, lame, and paralyzed people were lying there, waiting for the water to be stirred. From time to time an angel would come down and stir the waters, and the first one to step in after the stirring would be healed of whatever disease they had. There was a man there who had been sick for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked, "Do you want to be healed?" The sick man answered, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me." Then Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat, and walk." Immediately the man was healed, picked up his mat, and began to walk. And that day was a Sabbath. There's a theological perspective, maybe perspective is the right word, called cessationism. Cessationism is the belief that the gifts of the Holy Spirit have ceased. These gifts stopped, they ended in the 1st century. Generally, and I emphasize that this is not always the case, but generally, monergistic theology is also cessationist. This monergistic view holds that humans have no role in their salvation. No decision to accept Jesus, nothing. This theological perspective, known as cessationism, gained traction through some theologians, mainly European, almost always German, and to some extent from Switzerland. These European theologians, like Rudolf Bultmann, for instance, and Paul Tillich, had a significant influence with their biblical commentaries, which are highly important. It's impossible to study the New Testament without engaging with Bultmann's work, which includes a 2,000-page volume on the New Testament. However, theologians like Bultmann apply a metaphorical interpretation to the healings performed by Jesus. Since they don't believe that the miracles literally happened, they propose a reinterpretation of the healings, which are numerous in the New Testament. Bultmann, for instance, argues that there were no actual healings, not even in the Bible. He's going to argue that, for instance, when we talk about the blind man from Jericho, it's not that he was physically blind, but that he couldn't see God's work. Then Jesus spoke with him, and after that he began to perceive this truth. It wasn't about physical blindness. The same logic applies to the paralytics and the lepers, where leprosy is seen as a symbol of sin or something along those lines. However, when we open the Bible, it's clear that these healings were real. Jesus used these healings as a way to draw people's attention so he could preach the gospel, and this was so effective that wherever Jesus went, crowds followed him. And it's obvious that the healings recorded in Jesus' ministry also carry deep lessons for us beyond the immediate act of healing. For instance, the Gospel of John ends in the last verse of chapter 21, verse 25, which says, "Jesus did many other things as well. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that even the whole world would not have room for the books that would be written." From this verse, we understand that the recorded healings are not all of them. They are just a portion of what Jesus did. But even so, it's a significant number. How many miracles did Jesus perform in the Bible? 35. Jesus performed 35 miracles from Matthew to John during his ministry. For some, this might seem like a lot. For others, it might seem like a little. But either way, that's the number of recorded miracles. And when I say miracles, I mean everything, not just healings. Healings are a smaller part. Miracles include calming the storm, turning water into wine, and so on. So why only 35? When we count, it might seem like a small number. But it's important to remember that Jesus' ministry wasn't just about healings and miracles. It was about preaching the gospel that transforms lives. John explains that if everything Jesus did were recorded, the books wouldn't fit in the world. So why do we have 35 miracles in the four Gospels? These miracles were recorded to show you and me something much deeper than just the miracle itself experienced by someone 2,000 years ago. It's not just about that specific healing, but about what it means for us today. These miracles aren't in the Bible just to recount supernatural historical events. The leprous man is no longer here. These miracles aren't there just to show that Jesus is God, although that's part of it. These miracles weren't recorded just to show how God was kind to a few people in that crowd. There's a reason why these 30-some miracles were recorded in the scriptures and have been preserved across generations, languages, and cultures until they reached us. That reason is that each of these 35 miracles has something to teach us. Every miracle carries a message relevant to your life and mine. Each recorded miracle holds a special meaning for us. In John chapter 5, we see Jesus performing another miracle. He heals a man who had been paralyzed for 38 years, enabling him to walk again. This man had spent those 38 years as a beggar, living on the margins, relying on charity, and lying by a pool believed to have supernatural powers. Occasionally, the waters would be stirred and the first person to step in would be healed. This is one of the healings Jesus performed, and it was recorded in the Gospel of John. It's worth noting that John's Gospel mentions only 7 miracles of Jesus, with only a few healings included. So, if this particular healing was included in John's Gospel, which reports relatively few miracles, it must hold significant importance. And that's what I'd like us to reflect on. What can the healing of a paralyzed man 2,000 years ago teach us? Why did John record this miracle? Why is it in the Bible? What lessons can we learn from it? I want to offer 3 points for us to consider. First point. This healing is in the Bible to remind us that our problems are not more difficult than those of others. In the passage, when Jesus asks the man if he wants to be healed, he replies, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I'm on my way, someone else steps down ahead of me." This response shows how he viewed his condition as worse than that of those around him. There were many sick people around the pool, but he believed his paralysis was a greater disadvantage. Imagine someone who is only deaf. They can still walk so they can reach the pool more quickly. Or someone who is blind, they can find their way and get there first. Even a person with a limp or leprosy who can still walk had a better chance than he did. When Jesus asked if he wanted to be healed, the man essentially replied that he could never make it in time because others always got there before him. And the first part of his response was, "I have no one." When Jesus arrives and asks if he wants to be healed, the man responds with 2 points. First, that he has no one to help him. Second, that whenever he tries, someone else always gets there before him. Do you see why this healing is recorded in the Bible? What does Jesus want to teach us through this? This man has been sick for a long time, living a difficult life, but the way he faces these challenges makes everything even harder, as we can tell from his response to Jesus. First, he says, "I have no one." Notice that this situation isn't just about his illness. I know this because in Mark chapter 2, there's another paralyzed man. But in Mark 2 verse 3, the text tells us that some people came to Jesus, carrying a paralyzed man who was being carried by 4 men. And if we continue reading, we see that these men took the paralyzed man up to the roof of a house, removed part of the roof and lowered him down with ropes. Now, think about it. Is that easy or hard? It's hard, of course. But it seems that the paralyzed man in Mark 2 was someone worth making such a huge effort for. He had friends who considered him important. On the other hand, the paralyzed man in John 5 says he has no one. One man has 4 friends willing to do anything for him, while the other has no one to help him into the pool. This makes me think about the kind of life each of these men chose to live. What kind of person am I if, in my time of trouble, I have no one by my side? What kind of relationships have I built throughout my life, that in moments of distress, there's no one around? So, is your problem really more complicated than others? Is your situation really more delicate? Or is it the way you live your life that makes everything more difficult? I believe this healing was recorded in the gospel to teach us that life isn't just about being able to walk or not, but about who's around us when we need them most. The type of life we choose to live shows us who will be there for us in our most difficult times. So, why is this healing recorded in the Bible? Because we need to learn that our problems aren't more complicated than anyone else's. It's about the connections we build with others. These connections can be either functional or not. Secondly, it's crucial to realize that it's possible to be in Jesus' presence and still not experience transformation. Think about it. How long had this man been sick lying by the pool? It wasn't just a short time. It was a very long time. This means that when the star of Bethlehem shone and the angels sang to the shepherds, this man was already sick. He had been sick even before Jesus was born. When Jesus was 33 years old, this man's illness had been with him for even longer. He was already paralyzed when Jesus was born. And what else does this mean? As a Jew, Jesus went to Jerusalem every year. During his ministry he went 3 times, but before that he went every year. This is recorded in Luke chapter 2. So, what does this imply? It means that Jesus passed by that place many times. This man saw Jesus many times over the years, watched Jesus grow up, and was in his presence countless times. How many times did Jesus pass by there? We don't know exactly, but it was a lot. And what difference did it make for that man? Absolutely nothing. Those of us who follow the faith are at risk of knowing Jesus, hearing about him, working for him, and still not being transformed. We see that, although being in Jesus' presence is a blessing, if there's no transformation, it's of no use to us. This man had been without restoration for 38 years, living just a few meters from the center of worship, from the place where God's glory was manifested. He was so close to God's presence, yet his life remained unchanged. This teaches us an important lesson. It's possible to be surrounded by the things of God and still not be transformed. How many of us are close to God, near the manifestation of his glory, hearing the gospel being preached and lived, yet we experience no change? If the answer is nothing, we need to stop and reflect on what's happening. Some people seem impervious to the work of God. They can witness miracles and still remain indifferent, without transformation. This shows us that it's possible to be in Jesus' presence, especially for those who grew up in the faith and still not be transformed. Especially for those who have grown accustomed to faith, it's easy to fall into a routine. You come and go, but while others are moved to tears, you remain unmoved. Others are praying, but you don't pray. You see people studying and transforming, but you don't study. You notice those who never preached before starting to preach, but you don't preach. You see people worshiping, but you don't worship. You observe people getting involved, but you don't get involved. It's like you're lying on a stretcher just watching people move back and forth, going to and from worship. You see Jesus, you see the disciples, you witness healings, you hear about miracles, you observe the movements of faith in the church, but you remain just a spectator, not engaging. Is it possible to be in God's presence and not be transformed by him? Yes, it is. And I know this because Remember when Jesus was 12 years old and stayed behind in the temple? This man had already been there for 18 years when Jesus first arrived at the temple. I wish I had more time to delve into this second point, but let's move on. Third point. Forget about people and focus solely on Jesus Christ. Forget the people and focus on Jesus. Brothers and sisters, it's not people who solve things, it's the word of Jesus that brings change. Why am I saying this? Because of what the text says in verses 5 and 6. Jesus saw the man lying there and knew he had been in that condition for a long time, so he asked him, "Do you want to be healed?" Another version says, "Do you want to be made well?" And the man's response was, "I have no one to put me into the pool, and whenever I try to go, someone else gets there ahead of me." The man mentions two problems both related to people. Problem number 1. I have no one to help me. Problem number 2. When I try, someone else goes ahead of me. Notice, when Jesus asks if he wants to be healed, the man responds by complaining about others. I have no one to help me. When I try, someone else gets in front of me. In other words, he was saying his situation was the fault of those around him. I'm not just talking for the sake of talking, it's the truth. I can say what I'm about to say. The people of our generation are full of excuses like no others who have ever lived on this planet. When you talk to someone about Jesus, they quickly change the subject. "Oh, but did you see what happened? There was a scandal, something leaked, and so on." Stop focusing so much on people. They won't fix anything in your pain, your healing, your weaknesses, your lack of spirituality, or your lack of commitment to following the gospel. They won't change anything for you. Even if all the people you criticize suddenly changed overnight, it wouldn't change your life. If the entire world, including the pastors you talk about, changed right now, in a minute your life would still be the same. And yes, we know there are scandals, and Jesus Christ told us that things will get worse. But the question is, where do you choose to focus? The man in the biblical story says, "I have no one to help me, and when I try, someone else goes ahead of me." In other words, he's blaming his situation on other people. So what now? Jesus' question is straightforward, with no beating around the bush. Jesus didn't approach him saying, "Look, I know your life must be tough." No, Jesus was direct and asked, "Do you want to be healed?" Today, a question like that might even seem disrespectful. Imagine asking a blind person, "Do you want to see?" The blind person might say, "Jesus, I feel like you're invading my space." Jesus' question is so direct that it borders on being rude. He walks up to the paralyzed man and asks, "Do you want to walk?" Try doing that to a paralyzed person on the street or a blind person. Today that would be considered offensive because of political correctness and all. But Jesus had the courage to ask the real question. What do you really want? Jesus' question is brilliant. It's not about what you think needs to happen or how life should be for someone in your situation. But that's how the man responded. He was focused on how he thought life should be. It's as if Jesus had asked, "How do you think life should be for someone with your problem?" And the man replied that life should be full of people to help at the right moment. But that's not what Jesus asked. He didn't want to know how the man thought life should be. Now stop and think about the life you've built up to this point. The choices you've made have brought you here, with the friends you have, the enemies, the dreams, the frustrations, the guilt, and the privileges. You built this life and you're responsible for it. And then Jesus comes and says, "I don't want to know how you think life should be for someone with your problem. I'm not asking how you think people should act or respond to someone with your pain. My question is simple. Do you want to walk or not? Do you want to be healed? Do you want to be made whole? It's not about how you think others should live or behave. It's not about how you see life happening around you. Jesus' question is about you. Jesus' question is about your pain. Jesus' question is about your problem. And here comes the biggest revelation. When the man says there's no one to help him, that whenever he tries, someone else gets there first, Jesus doesn't engage with that. The text continues saying that when Jesus saw the man had been there a long time, he said, "Get up, pick up your mat, and walk." This isn't just about the people around you. It's Jesus dealing directly with you. When Jesus heals this man without anyone's help, he's saying you don't need people. You just need my word. You don't need someone to carry you. You don't need anyone else. You need me. It's not about the pool. It's not about the people. The man talks about the lack of people to help him and those who get in his way. It's clear in the text. I have no one to put me into the pool. There's no one to help me. When I try, someone else goes down before me. There are people who hinder me. And Jesus is leading this man to a new way of thinking, saying, stop focusing on needing people to help you and stop worrying about those who hinder you. It's not about that. It's about my word over your life. It's my word that makes the difference. May God bless you in Jesus' name.